Hello, everyone. This is Pierre Ferrari, President and CEO of Heifer International. And today, I'm really thrilled to be able to have a conversation with William Matovu, who is one of our country directors. He's the country director for Uganda. And the country directors in Heifer are the central operating units across the globe. So they know what's going on, and they stay close with the communities with whom we work. And hopefully we at headquarters help them do what they need to do. So today's conversation is about exploring what is going on in Uganda relative to the COVID pandemic there and the impact it's had on our audience, our participating group, the smallholder farmer. And I know that the team in Uganda has done some excellent research to find out exactly what's going on and then finding solutions. So, William, I'm going to hand it over to you and you can talk to us about what you've done, what you found out, and what kind of ideas do we have about the short-term actions that we could take and also what the impact might be on the long term. So over to you, William. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Good to see you too. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. Good evening across the world. Again, as Pierre has indicated, I'm William, and I work as the country director in Uganda. I think Pierre will take it by first providing a general picture in terms of what the COVID situation is in Uganda. So far for now, we have about 6,468 cases. We've so far registered 63 deaths as a country, and we have about 2,731 persons who have recovered. So COVID is affecting everybody across the world, and indeed it's also affecting ourselves, our farmers, our staff, our partners, the local governments, and everybody who work with. Now, when the country went into a lockdown, potentially what we're defining as a lockdown in our situation, sometime in March, we had to take a decision from the advice by government to also close our offices. And subsequently, what then it meant was that we were no longer in constant touch directly with our farmers. Our staff were not really able to reach out to our farmers. But we maintain contact through the robust structure that we have of community extension workers. And so our staff kept on reaching out to extension workers and some farmers and the agri-hubs that we set up to understand how things were going. So from the weekly reports that we used to get, we got to understand that indeed COVID was impacting on the farmers and on the value chain actors because one, government had locked down. So in other words, public transport had been suspended. We had a situation whereby people were not allowed to move from one region to the other. We had a number of other services, including offices, had been closed. But government maintained critical services. For instance, agriculture was considered as a critical service. Health was considered as a critical service. Of course, schools were also closed down. And with closing down most of the critical services like transport, that had a huge effect on the farmers because farmers then could not move their produce from the gardens and from the aggregation centers onto the markets. And in the same manner, it was also difficult for them to get access to inputs. So because we already had commitments with a number of donors and we had this pandemic coming in, we said, okay, it makes a lot of sense for us to go back and then do a research to understand better after the lockdown, what next? How are we going to support these farmers better in the short term, but also in the medium term? What is the implication of COVID-19 on our programs? And in long term, what is COVID-19 going to imply to our work in Uganda? And that's a background in terms of how we came about undertaking that study. And the study largely focused on 448 farmers that we work across all the projects we work with in Uganda. It also targeted 10 agribusiness hubs. It also targeted 4 private sector companies that we work with or we partner with, and then 3 local governments that we selected across the regions where we do work. And we got an interesting findings. So from our findings out of the study which we did in May 2020, we found out that 97% of the farmers who had participated in the study had got a reduction in their income. In fact, 83% of those farmers had their incomes drop by more than 50%. So that is huge, and that had to really make us think through how are we going to respond, how are we going to redesign and also look at the project which we had earlier on planned as a country program. So because of that background, we saw that the impacts were great. The other findings which we note was that close to 40% of farmers who used to have 3 meals in a day could now only afford to have 1 meal per day. Of course, it's because the incomes had been greatly affected. We saw that close to about 83% of the farmers who we had organized in informal savings and lending groups were no longer able to save. Why? Because they were no longer required to meet in bigger groups, and then they were also no longer required to move from their homes to possibly come into a meeting. So that has had a drastic effect in the sense that what the farmers had to resort to is to depend on the savings that they have already saved. So after the lockdown, we saw that the savings had been watered down, and that drastically is having a great implication in terms of how they are running their business. So in a broader sense, those were the key impacts that we found out of the study which we did concerning the impacts of COVID on the smallholder farmers in Uganda.
Yeah, William, you know, the movement, one thing about COVID, which it doesn't affect plant growth, right? The animals keep eating, the animals keep growing, and the plants keep growing, etc. All this to say that there is produce going on and there's actually product available for sale, right? So, and public transportation, so this is a question, the public transportation would have been normally the vehicle by which farmers would have gotten their product to market, is that right?
Yeah, good question, Pierre. The way our farmers are organized and structured in here is that they will use all mechanism of transport. Of course, there will be transport which then is transporting goods from rural areas onto the markets like lorries. But also in many cases, farmers are also using public transport like buses. Mm-hmm. In some cases also using or hiring private cars to be able to transport goods from the aggregation centers onto the market. But also in many cases, they are using motorcycles to move mm-hmm. goods from the rural center, from the rural areas or the villages onto the aggregation center. So all those movements had been stopped. And because of that, that had a great effect in terms of the transport logistics of moving goods and inputs to the farmers.
So even the motorcycle business or infrastructure was actually disrupted, huh?
Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely yes.
Is that back in function? Is that functioning now or not? Or is
yeah. So what government has been doing is that it has been getting it back on the road in phases. In the first phase, they allowed the private cars to move. Of course, that was still a constraint in a sense that you not have public transport, and most of the people definitely use public transport in a country like mine. And again, that still had a great effect in terms of the cost of moving goods from one location to the other. But as of now, we now have both the private transport and the public transport and the motorcycles back on the road. And so things are slowly getting back to
So
normality.
how during this whole interruption of the logistics, transportation would be public, private, etc., how did the urban centers feed themselves?
Yeah, good. Yeah. So among the key priority sectors that were left open was transport meant for goods. For instance, lorries. So the lorries were allowed to move from one location to the other, but also they put a cap at the time at which they were supposed to move. For instance, there was a curfew whereby vehicles, especially those who are moving goods, could move from about 7 a.m. in the morning, and they were allowed to stop at about 9 p.m., 10 p.m. So, of course, when you curtail transport, which is meant for goods, again, that is disrupting the logistical transport for moving goods and input from one location to the other. So either food does not arrive on the market in time, or even farmers may not have inputs on time. And even in some cases, the cost of transport goes up because also the guys who are running the transport business see an opportunity to make money out of that challenge.
So given that, let's say it happens again in one form or another, let's hope it does not, but let's say something like this happens again, or there is a resurgence in COVID. What should we be doing? We as Heifer and the government and everything else, how do we make sure that this incredible decline in income doesn't happen again?
Yeah, good question, Pierre. I think COVID is giving us a lot of learnings and things to think about. From our research, one of the things which we see and note is that for the farmers who are somehow organized or very much organized into agri-herbs, the effect was not that grave as the farmers who are not organized at all. For instance, we have some of the herbs whereby cost of a liter of milk dropped from around 40 US dollars, around 27 US dollars, and it came down to about 16 US dollars. Okay, but because they already organized, at least we were able to continue to fit into the supply chain, into the logistical chain. So one of the learning is that organizing and strengthening farmers into viable producer groups is very critical and central in terms of enabling them to ensure that they can shorten and fit into especially the informal supply chains that we have in settings like ours. So farm organization is very critical. So the other thing which we also note is that it's going to be central and very important to focus on innovation and deploying of technology. But that will be innovation and technology that works for the farmers. So in some of the cases where farmers were able to have infrastructure like cold chain, for instance, if they had a cooling plant whereby they could really aggregate their milk and cool it for a day or two, so that enabled them to...
Now you're not talking about milk now, you're talking about vegetables, like refrigerated warehouses.
Yes, absolutely. For both, actually, for both, yes, for vegetables, but also for milk itself.
Yeah.
So for the farmers who are able to really have, especially for those who are engaging in vegetable, able to have the cold chain, they were able to access the market. But for those who are not, it was a bit very difficult. For especially the farmers who are working with that are within the dairy value chain, for those who had the cooling plants, it was easier for them to continue feeding into the supply chain. For those who are just aggregating warm milk, they had to stop business, and that meant lost income completely.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing which we're also noticing is that skills. I think skills is becoming a critical thing, and when I talk of skills, it means that do farmers have management skills? Do they have business skills? Do they have networking skills? Have they built relationship with suppliers, either input suppliers or even off-takers of their goods? And currently we are seeing that there are emerging set of skills that the farmers need to have if at all they are going to fit into the new normal. So focusing on skilling farmers and preparing them to ensure that events like these ones, pandemic like these ones, cannot really greatly affect them, can ensure that they are more resilient to effects of pandemic like this one is very important. So some of the things which we are now thinking of is that how can we introduce digitalization of some of the systems they are working through. Instead of transacting through cash, can they switch to mobile money, M-Pesa, as a means of facilitating transactions? Are there situations whereby the rural women can be able to understand how to use a smartphone? Because some of them do not know, they are not part of the digital world. So how do we support them to acquire those kind of skills? Because now we are seeing that business is going in a manner whereby switching on technology-wise is going to be very important to feed into the new normal. So those are critical aspects that we think needs to be focused on if we really to support farmers to be able to be more resilient and they are not very much affected to incidents like this one. And the other aspect is to do with savings, okay? In our study, we note that 83% of the farmers had to survive on their savings, which they had in the formal earnings and savings groups. So the learning is that if farmers are able to save more, if they are able to engage in value chains, which can enable them to make money, and then they save some of that money, then they can reach out to those savings during bad times, okay? But the critical thing is that for how long can they depend on those kind of savings? Because the research is indicating to us that right now most of them are looking out for cheap capital so that they can bounce back. So really looking at financing models and saving portfolios or saving mechanisms that ensures that farmers have a fallback position is important when we're working with farmers and to ensure that they cannot be greatly affected by pandemics like these ones in the future.
So this point of view about skills is really fascinating. You know, because I think we take for granted that when people are under pressure, they are going to figure out an answer. But if they don't really quite know how to do it, or have never seen an opportunity like this, so are you actually planning right now to put together a curriculum to teach people how to, you know, network and deal with suppliers and customers? And I assume this all will be done through, maybe it's the wrong assumption, but I'm assuming this all will be done through the co-ops, right? The co-op leadership, or is this individual farmers?
Yeah, absolutely, yes, yeah. So one of the things which we are noting is that there's a new set of business development services that farmers currently need to fit into the new normal. And part of those business development services is training that can enable them to respond to post-pandemic, post-COVID-19. Our thinking is to put into place a training manual which can now assist the already organized agri-hubs so that they can be able to reach out to their members. And the learning we're getting from that is out of, again, the research we undertook, because for the stronger hubs, we saw that they were even able to put into place what we call a COVID response mechanism to their members. For instance, they set aside a certain pot of money and they were able to buy food and distribute to their members. They were able to buy inputs and distribute to their members. They were able to arrange logistics to transport inputs from the capital city, like animal drugs, like equipment, like seeds that farmers need, and then farmers were able to access them. So yes, indeed, in our new training package that we're looking at. We're looking at those set of skills that farmers need to be able to be more responsive or to respond to life past pandemic.
So this may be an unfair question, William. As you know, I'm always unfair in my questioning. If I was, and I don't have the money, let me just repeat, I don't have the money, but if I said, okay, I've got $1 million, what would you do with it right away? What would be the most important thing you would do?
So the critical thing right now, and again, farmers were very clear, they demonstrated that as part of their need, is to support them to get access to cheap and affordable capital.
Okay.
Form of finance, farmers most often are not able to get access to form of finance, the commercial banks and etc. So where they have been going were the savings and credit associations or the informal lending and saving groups at the village level. So if you give me $1 million US, then I will be able to invest that money in those savings and credit associations so that farmers can get access to cheap capital, and then they are able to resuscitate their businesses back. And where possible, they are also able to look at the new opportunities that COVID has presented to them. So
the financial chain you're talking about is that these credit operations would lend at affordable rates, but some rate, right? 5%, 10%, 12%. What would be the rate they would lend to?
Yeah, absolutely. Because this is a member-based organization. Because what we do is that we organize the same farmers to set up their own savings and credit association, and it's member-based. It's their money, so they save and then take loans from their own pot. So they are able to really manage cost of operating such an association, and that means money becomes a little bit cheaper. So they are able to lend it out between 9% to 12%, depending on where they're located and depending on the nature of the business that you're engaged in.
Now that's interesting, because it might be worthwhile for you to have a conversation with our capital group and see whether $1 million is available at some rate, some low rate, some concessionary rate, if you like, into the system. So that's possible, and we can have a conversation post this conversation about whether that's possible and under what terms, etc. But the idea, and of course, the expectation would be that the farmers, when business comes back, would repay these loans, right? These are loans,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And in terms of infrastructure, you talked about cold chain, you talked about transportation. What do you think should change? Because clearly the system is very vulnerable, right? You got a pandemic, everything stops, income goes down by 50%, people go hungry. What is it that we could do from an infrastructure point of view? Not capital now, but infrastructure. Well, you may need capital to build the infrastructure, but what would be the highest priority infrastructure to build to provide the flexibility and resilience to handle, this kind of impact? Oh, I think his wife. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I lost you for a minute, Pierre.
Did you hear my question?
Yeah, I heard you ask about what we need, what we need to do about the infrastructure. Yeah.
Yeah. What would be the highest priority in infrastructure?
I think for the farmers, if I look at my setting, the critical need is what I would call the post-harvest handling related infrastructure. For instance, if I look at some of the farmers that we are working with who are in the soya value chain, they were so vulnerable in a sense that because they didn't have silos of their own, so they were forced to be able to sell out their grain at a giveaway price. Okay, but in case these farmers had their own silos, they are able to harvest their grain, put it in a silo, wait a little bit longer when the markets are doing great, and then they are able to put it on the market. That gives them bargaining power. So there is some work to do on the post-harvest handling infrastructure, and which is also a learning that we are getting from the dairy value chain, because what we saw was that the processors continued to buy from the hubs which were organized by Heifer, because farmers continue to provide, number one, good quality milk, and also number two, because they had already had a cold chain into place. So because they had a cold chain into place, so they could store the milk, and then subsequently the processor sends a truck and they are able to sell to him. So for me, the post-handling infrastructure is very critical to put into place. So the other aspect would be in a way to work with farmers or critical values, I'll call them values aligned players, to also support farmers, say for instance, have transport, say like transport trucks. For instance, if we had a situation whereby we had, say, a cooperative of farmers who are owning their own truck, or a cooperative which is meant for only providing transport service, that could possibly have supported the value chain so that it's not as vulnerable as we saw it during the COVID pandemic situation.
Mm. So the storage idea, you know, is prevalent all over the world, whether it's rice in Cambodia or soy in Uganda, or, you know, whatever the commodity is. What's the cost in Uganda for soy? What's the cost of an individual storage facility for a farmer? Are we talking about $100, $1,000 per unit? What kind of range are we talking about?
You said for individual farmer, if I look at what FAO is able to put onto the market, number one, they innovated the bag. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the technical term, but also they innovated some silos, I think, which goes to about 150 to $200 per silo. So if I'm a farmer, then a farmer is able to store his 500 kilograms or 1 ton under that silo that costs $200. So that really galvanizes a farmer from any sort of risk and any sort of being manipulated by traders into the market.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember we had the same situation for rice in Cambodia, and the farmers actually, with our help, built a storage, a rice storage, a rice bank they call it. And at harvest, of course, all the farmers were harvesting at the same time, right? So the pricing for rice was very low. But it didn't take another 2 months before prices started rising. And of course, the longer you waited, the higher the price for rice. And so the cost of the what do you call it, this rice bank was very low, about $100. And they were able to make that money back, and 10 times in 3 months. So maybe that's something we should focus on, is to provide resilience across the whole farming community, that storage, one for your own use, right? In case you need the food, and secondly, to take advantage of market price fluctuations. Interesting. So I think we've come to the end of our half hour, William. I could keep talking to you for another several hours, and hopefully I'll be coming to Uganda soon, and we can do that. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your dedication to the poor and getting them out of poverty and hunger. I think it's you're part of this wonderful heifer system that we have, and we're very proud of you and all of your staff. So be good, be well, and talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Very exciting conversation we had. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Take care too. Yeah.
Bye-bye.